A leather-bound notebook. That's what they found in the breast pocket of General Major Hans Kurt Hooker, captured outside Metz on November 18, 1944, his uniform still carrying the dust of the Moselle Valley. The notebook was not a military document. It wasn't a tactical manual or an order of battle. It was a personal journal, the kind a man keeps when he thinks no one will ever read it. And on the final entry written the morning before his capture, Hooker had written 7 words in careful, deliberate script. Ich habe sie falsch eingeschätzt. Vollkommen falsch. I misjudged them. Completely wrong. That sentence was the end of something. It was the end of a belief, held at every level of the Wehrmacht from the Rhine to Berlin, that the American soldier was a showman, a Hollywood creation, and a man who could shoot a rifle but couldn't absorb punishment, couldn't improvise, couldn't function when the plan fell apart. They had been wrong about all of it. But here is the question that notebook raises, the question that the battle before that final entry actually answers. What exactly did American soldiers do in the mud and cold of the Moselle that forced a German general to write those words? By the end of this, you will know. Part 1. The weight of the mission. September 1944. The war in Western Europe had entered its most deceptive phase. To anyone reading a headquarters map, it looked like it was almost over. Paris had fallen in August. Patton's Third Army had slashed across France at speeds that made the cartographers scramble to keep up, sometimes advancing 60 miles in a single day. In the newsreels back home showed jubilant French crowds, flowers thrown at Sherman tanks, soldiers kissing girls in liberated squares. The German army, those maps suggested, was broken. The maps were lying. What the maps did not show was that the Wehrmacht, battered, bled, tactically humiliated across France, had retreated to ground it new. The Moselle River, the Siegfried Line, the fortress city of Metz, which had not fallen to an enemy army since 451 A.D. The Germans had shortened their supply lines, consolidated their best remaining divisions, and dug themselves into terrain that negated American armor superiority. They were not broken. They were waiting. And they were waiting for men exactly like Captain James Olin Buck Marsh, 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division, 3rd Army, now to come to them. Marsh was 29 years old, born in Gadsden, Alabama, where his father ran a hardware store on Broad Street. He was not tall. He was not especially dramatic in appearance. Officers who served with him described a man with quick eyes and a habit of folding and unfolding a letter from his wife, Elaine, before every operation. Not reading it, just holding it. The letter had been written in July from their home in Alabama and contained, among other things, the information that their first child was due in February. Marsh had read it so many times the crease lines had worn white. He commanded a mixed company of tankers and attached infantry, approximately 140 men, with the operational call sign, Bulldog. The unit had fought from Normandy through the breakout, had taken casualties at Argentan and again at the crossing of the Meuse, and had been rebuilt to roughly 80% strength by the time Third Army headquarters issued the orders that brought them to the Moselle Valley in late September 1944. The objective was the Pont-à-Mousson bridge complex, 17 kilometers north of Nancy. Think about why a bridge matters in a war like this one. Patton's entire operational theory, the idea that speed kills, that a retreating enemy given time to regroup becomes twice as dangerous, that the worst thing you can do to momentum is stop, depended on river crossings. The Moselle was not a dramatic river. It was, in places, barely 40 meters wide, but 40 meters of cold water in October in the path of an armored advance is infinity. Without the Pont-à-Mousson bridge, Patton's push toward the Saar was delayed by days, and in the mathematics of 1944, days meant lives, thousands of them stretched across the winter that was coming. Headquarters had designed a plan. It was, on paper, a clean plan. BULLDOG Company would advance along Route Nationale 57, link up with a resistance contact identified only as Cardinal, a French operative who claimed to have confirmed the bridge was lightly defended, held by a single engineer company with orders to demolish rather than defend, and secure the western approach before German sappers could complete the demolition circuit. The plan had one flaw that no one at headquarters knew about. Cardinal had last physically observed the bridge on September 14th. The operation was scheduled for October 2nd. In those 18 days, something had changed at Pont-à-Mousson, something significant. At that same moment, 50 kilometers to the east, in a requisitioned farmhouse that still smelled of cattle and autumn hay, General Major Hooker was conducting his own briefing for the officers of Kampfgruppe Hooker, a battle group assembled from elements of the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division and the 559th Volksgrenadier Division. His intelligence officer had just finished describing the American force moving toward the bridge. Hooker listened. Then he said, and this is documented in the post-capture transcript of his interrogation at 7th Army Headquarters, conducted November 22, 1944. They will follow the road. Americans always follow the road. They have magnificent machines and no patience for anything their machines cannot do. Tell the men at the river, let them come. The officers laughed. Hooker poured wine. He had, in that moment, made the single worst tactical assumption of his career. But he had no reason to know that yet. He was looking at a map, and on the map, everything made sense. He had never met Buck Marsh. What happens when a general's perfect trap meets a captain who read the same terrain from the other side? Part 2. The Trap Springs. October 2nd, 1944. 0340 hours. BULLDOG Company moved out in darkness. Marsh rode in the lead vehicle. Not because regulations required it, but because he was constitutionally incapable of commanding from behind. He kept his head out of the commander's hatch despite the cold, scanning the road ahead with field glasses that fogged every 30 seconds. The column behind him was disciplined, tight, lights off. They had done this before. Sergeant First Class Raymond Dusty Kowalski, 24 years old, Detroit, Michigan, on 37th Tank Battalion, wrote in his after-action diary, "We moved out like we always did. The smell of diesel and somebody's cold coffee in a thermos, the LT, we called the Captain LT old habit, was watching the road like he expected it to reach up and grab him. Turns out he was right to watch it like that. The first wrong thing was the road itself. Route Nationale 57 north of Nancy runs through a shallow valley between two lines of low ridges. Farm country, apple orchards in the autumn dark, small stone villages with their shutters down. Intelligence had said the road was clear to within 4 kilometers of the bridge. The map showed nothing but farmland. At kilometer 3, Marsh's driver tapped his shoulder. Tire tracks, fresh ones, not civilian. The tread pattern of an Opel Blitz, the standard Wehrmacht medium transport, plural. Many vehicles turning off the road into a lane that led toward an orchard on the eastern ridge. Marsh raised a fist. The column stopped. He climbed down and crouched over the tracks with a flashlight cupped in his palm. The mud was still plastic. These vehicles had come through in the last 6 hours. His map showed nothing. No units, no transport, no activity in that orchard. He reached for his radio. The frequency he needed, the one that connected him to resistance contact Cardinal, returned static. Then a voice, but not Cardinal. A German voice, calm, reading numbers in sequence. Someone was on Cardinal's frequency. That was when Marsh understood. Cardinal was burned. The contact was compromised, captured, or dead. Every coordinate they had been given, every assurance of light resistance at the bridge. It came from a man who was, and at this moment, either in a Gestapo cell or working at German direction. He had 18 minutes to decide what to do before dawn made the column visible from the ridge line. He chose to keep moving, not toward the bridge. Not yet. He vectored the column off the road into the tree line on the western ridge and told his platoon leaders they were going dark. No radio, no engine noise above idle infantry forward on foot. That saved their lives. For about 4 minutes. The ambush came from the eastern ridge, from inside that same orchard. 4 MG-42s opened simultaneously. The distinctive tearing sound, not a rattle, a sustained ripping, overlapped with the crack of Panzerfaust rounds coming from the stone wall of a farmhouse to the north, and the first burst caught the third vehicle in column, a half-track carrying 12 men from 2nd Platoon, and set it alight in a single catastrophic second. Private First Class Jerome Aldridge, 19, Columbus, Ohio, was in that half-track. He did not survive. Marsh's tank was already moving, not backward, not sideways, forward and left into the ditch and through a hedgerow, engines screaming, because backing up meant the second vehicle in line, and he would not do that. He could hear Kowalski behind him on the infantry net. Contact right, contact from the orchard. And then the radio on Marsh's command channel came alive. Not enemy, American headquarters, 3rd Army relayed through Corps. The voice was a staff major Marsh had met once, and the orders were simple and catastrophic. Due to a shift in the divisional axis of advance, Bulldog was to halt current operations, consolidate, and await relief in place. The bridge mission was being reassigned to a unit coming down from the north. Marsh looked at the burning half-track, looked at the orchard still pouring fire at his column, looked at the ridge that his company was now pressed against while an enemy they hadn't expected in numbers they hadn't been briefed on hammered them from 3 sides. Halt, consolidate, await relief. He keyed the mic and acknowledged the order. Then he turned to his loader and said, "We are not stopping." 6 kilometers away, in his farmhouse headquarters, General Major Hooker received a report from the orchard position. The Americans had been hit. They had not broken. They had not retreated. Hooker's intelligence officer watched his commander read the report twice. "They should be pulling back by now," the intelligence officer said. Hooker said nothing. He read the report a 3rd time. "The enemy who doesn't run when you expect him to run. What do you do with that?" A like on this video takes 2 seconds. For Jerome Aldridge, 19 years old from Columbus, Ohio, and every man who didn't come back from a mission that history almost forgot, it is the least we can do. Part 3. The Patton Principle. There is a sentence that George S. Patton drilled into every officer in 3rd Army until it became reflex. Not a speech, not an inspiration, a tactical instruction. L'audace, l'audace, toujours l'audace. Boldness, boldness, always boldness. He had borrowed it from Frederick the Great, which told you something about Patton. He drew from whoever was right across any century without apology. But the sentence that mattered more, the one that actually governed the decisions of men like Buck Marsh in moments like this one, came from Patton's own pen, written in his field notes in 1943. When you hit a wall, the wall is information. It tells you exactly where the enemy chose to be strong, and therefore exactly where he chose to be weak. Read that again. Not because it's poetry, oh, it isn't, but because it explains what happened next. Marsh pulled his surviving platoon leaders into a shell crater at the base of the western ridge. 5 men crouched in mud with the sound of German automatic weapons overhead. He had lost 1 vehicle, 1 destroyed half-track, and 3 men confirmed dead. Kowalski had a field dressing on his left arm that was already bleeding through. The strength of the enemy position was obvious. The orchard on the eastern ridge, the farmhouse to the north, and Marsh could see it now through his field glasses. A newly dug trench line running from the riverbank to the road. Cardinal's intelligence hadn't been stale by days. It had been replaced by an entirely different defensive plan, probably implemented within the last 72 hours. The weakness was also obvious if you had Patton's words in your head. The German position was built around the road. Every gun was oriented to cover Route Nationale 57 and the bridge approach. The trenches ran perpendicular to vehicle axes. The orchard position was elevated but faced east to west, covering the approach corridor. Nothing was facing south. South was a kilometer of apple orchards, a dry creek bed, and a stone mill. Moulin des Trois Fontaines, built in 1782, still standing, that sat on the river's edge 300 meters below the bridge. The mill had a stone causeway connecting it to the eastern bank, used for centuries by farmers and fishermen. No vehicle could use it, but infantry could. Here was the problem. Between Marsh's position and that southern approach was a cluster of farmhouses, Ferme-la-Tour, occupied by a French family the resistance network had identified as neutral civilians. 6 people, 2 of them children. The dry creek bed ran directly through the farmyard. Marsh's indirect approach would take his infantry through that farmyard. And the German defenders, realizing they were being flanked, he would almost certainly respond with fire that would put those houses directly in the impact zone. He sat with that for 90 seconds, which, in a firefight, is a very long time. Then he sent his fastest runner, Private Thomas Espinoza, 21, El Paso, Texas, low-crawling across 200 meters of open ground to the farmhouse with one instruction written on a cigarette paper. Leave now, go to the river, stay under the bridge, do not come back. He watched Espinoza reach the door, watched a light come on inside. Watched 3 minutes later a woman leading 2 children and an old man in a single-file line toward the riverbank in the pre-dawn dark. Then he gave the order to move, and if what you just heard about Espinoza's sprint across that open ground has stayed with you, this channel exists to find these moments and bring them back. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Part 4. The breaking point, 05:12 hours. Marsh split his force. 12 tanks and the remaining vehicles, on everything that made noise, everything that was visible, stayed on the road, not advancing, just existing. Engines running. Occasional burst of machine gun fire returned toward the orchard. Enough activity to convince the German position that the Americans were still pinned, still unable to move, still waiting for orders that weren't coming. It was theater, expensive, dangerous theater. Meanwhile, 41 men, Marsh at the front, Kowalski bleeding beside him, moved in single file through the darkness of the western tree line south, and away from the bridge, away from contact, into the smell of wet grass and old apples and the cold mud of the creek bed. They moved without talking. Marsh later wrote in a letter to Third Army's After-Action Review Board that was declassified in 1972. I want to be precise about what that walk felt like. Not heroic, not even especially frightened, which I understand sounds wrong. It was the feeling of doing the one thing available to you, with the understanding that if you've read the ground correctly, you might be alive at dawn. And if you've read it wrong, you've just gotten 40 men killed in an apple orchard in France. Those two facts sit next to each other in your chest and you keep moving. They reached Moulin des Trois Fontaines at 05:38. The causeway was intact. Stone, maybe 4 feet wide, slick with morning damp, and a foot of water running beneath it. The eastern bank was 15 meters away, dark, quiet. The German position was 300 meters north, their guns still pointed at the road. Marsh sent 2 scouts across. They came back, clear. He sent the whole line across in groups of 6, 20 seconds between groups, weapons ready, no sound. The last man across was Marsh himself, and that was when Kowalski's wound gave out. The sergeant had been moving on Will in field dressings for 90 minutes. The bullet, a ricochet fragment they would learn later, had cut something more than muscle in his left arm. He went down at the base of the eastern bank without a sound, just his knees hitting the mud, his rifle clattering. Marsh caught him before he tipped into the river. He had 2 choices: leave Kowalski with 2 men and continue, or stop, either stabilize, reorganize, lose the darkness. Corporal Eddie Vasquez, 23, San Antonio, Texas, 37th Tank Battalion, wrote in his diary, "The captain didn't even pause. He just grabbed Dusty's rifle off the ground, handed it to the nearest man, said, 2 of you carry him." And we kept moving. I don't know if that was cold or kind. Maybe it was both. That's what command looked like up close. They came up on the German rear position from a direction that did not exist on any German defensive map. Because the German defensive map had been drawn to stop Americans coming down a road, not Americans coming through an apple orchard in the dark after crossing a mill causeway built in 1782. The first trench position, 4 men, 1 MG-42, facing north, became aware of BULLDOG Company approximately 3 seconds before BULLDOG Company was on top of them. The engagement lasted less than a minute. Short sentences here because that is what combat is. 4 German soldiers, 4 bursts of fire, silence. But the sound carried. The orchard position, hearing fire from the south, from behind them, reacted exactly the way Hooker's overconfident defense had guaranteed they would react, with confusion. Half the orchard position turned south, half kept their guns on the road. For 30 seconds, the German defensive line was split, its command structure processing a situation it had been told could not happen. Those 30 seconds were everything. Marsh keyed the radio, back in range of his vehicle column now, and said 2 words: "Move, now." The tanks came off the road and hit the farmhouse position from the west at the same moment BULLDOG's infantry hit the trench line from the south. The battle for the bridge approach lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes. That number matters. Because Hooker's engineers had been given a 30-minute warning protocol before demolition. If BULLDOG had hit the front of the German position the way headquarters expected, the way the road-based defense was designed to absorb, the delay would have triggered it. 30 minutes of attrition in the kill zone meant a blown bridge. 11 minutes meant the engineers never got their warning. At 06:17, Captain James Olin Marsh stood on the western deck of the Pont-à-Mousson bridge, intact. German demolition charges still wired but not detonated, and radioed the following to 3rd Army headquarters. BULLDOG at objective, bridge secure, recommend immediate exploitation. 600 kilometers away in Washington, the news would eventually reach a planning board as a single line in an operational summary. On the ground, it looked like this: 23 men standing in the first gray light of October 2nd, 1944, beside a French river, some of them sitting in the mud because their legs had simply stopped. Kowalski was alive. The family from Fermi-Latour was alive, retrieved from under the bridge where Espinosa had sent them. Private Aldridge, 19, Columbus, Ohio, was not alive. Jerome Aldridge had a mother named Beatrice and a younger brother named Curtis, who would spend 40 years looking for documentation of what his brother had actually done on the morning of October 2nd. And the objective was taken. Read those numbers: 41 men, 11 minutes, 1 bridge, 1 family walking home from a riverbank in the dawn. Story like this matter. The men who earned those 11 minutes deserve to be remembered. If this channel does that for you, subscribe. It's how we keep going. Part 5. The verdict. When the sun came up over the Moselle on October 2nd, the battlefield was not dramatic. It was wet. It smelled of diesel and cordite and something organic that soldiers learn not to name. The German trench line held 14 dead. The farmhouse position, 12. Bulldog had lost 4 killed, including Aldridge, and 9 wounded. The demolition charges on the bridge, 40 kilograms of Sprengstoff 88, had been cut from their wiring by Sergeant Vasquez with a folding knife he had carried since Normandy, and the bridge was functional by 800. Third Army armor was crossing it by 1400. General Major Hooker was captured 16 days later, outside Metz, on November 18th. His post-capture interrogation at 7th Army Headquarters, conducted by Major Frank Westerfield and translated into English on November 22, 1944, is a remarkable document. Hooker had spent those 16 days watching the consequences of Pont-à-Mousson ripple through his sector, armor pouring through a crossing he had been certain his defensive plan would deny. In the interrogation transcript, when asked about the operation, he did not prevaricate. He said, "The decision to move through the mill approach, that is not in any American tactical manual we had studied. I want to be clear about that. We studied their manuals. We had their field circulars. We understood their doctrine. What we did not understand was that their doctrine allows, encourages, the individual officer to discard the doctrine entirely when the situation demands it. In the German system, the officer who abandons the plan is the officer who has failed. In the American system, apparently, the officer who abandons the plan and finds a better one is the one who wins. That is a very different army. It took me until the Moselle to believe it." He had laughed at the road-following Americans 18 days earlier. He was not laughing now. He was not alone in this recalibration. Oberstleutnant Werner Kaschner, commanding the 559th Volksgrenadier Regiment elements at the Orchard position, wrote in his post-capture statement, "I processed by Allied intelligence in December 1944. What I faced at the bridge was not American doctrine. It was American judgment. That is harder to defend against. Doctrine you can plan for. Judgment you cannot." Patton received the after-action report on October 4th. He was by then already planning the next crossing. His response, relayed to 4th Armored Division headquarters, was characteristically brief. "Marsh, keep him." He would later include the Pont-à-Mousson action, without naming Marsh specifically, in his operational notes as an example of what he called the educated improvisation. The concept was this: thorough preparation for a plan followed by total willingness to abandon that plan the moment reality contradicts it. Not chaos, not recklessness, and the opposite. A mind so thoroughly prepared that when the prepared plan dies, something better can immediately replace it. Every obstacle is a map of the enemy's thinking. The wall tells you where they chose to be strong, and therefore where they chose to be weak. Buck Marsh had not invented that idea. He had simply been trained by a man who understood it completely, and he had held onto it in a shell crater in France at 400 on an October morning, when the cold was real and the fear was real and the only light was a burning half-track. The lesson of that morning is not about bravery as an abstraction. It is about bravery as a practical tool. The capacity to keep your mind clear enough when every instinct says to freeze or retreat or wait for someone else's order, and to read the terrain in front of you and find the thing the enemy forgot to cover. That is Patton's actual legacy. Not the speeches, not the pearl-handled revolvers. The insistence, in training and doctrine and the culture of his army, that a soldier who can think under fire is worth 100 soldiers who can only follow a plan. Moulin des Trois Fontaines still stands. The stone mill on the Moselle River, built in 1782, still there as of 2023. Its causeway repaired, its walls bearing no visible mark of October 2nd, 1944. You can visit it. You can stand on the stone where 41 men crossed single file in the dark. in the churchyard of the village of Pont-à-Mousson, there is a memorial tablet. Among the names on it, added in a 1988 ceremony organized by the French families of the Ferme-la-Tour district, is a name that does not belong to a local soldier. Private First Class Jerome Aldridge, Columbus, Ohio, 19 years old. They remembered him. The family he protected. The family that walked to the river because a 21-year-old from El Paso crawled 200 meters through a firefight to slide a note under their door. They made sure of it. That is what 11 minutes can do. If your father, grandfather, or great-grandfather served in the European theater, 3rd Army, 4th Armored, any unit that crossed the Moselle in the autumn of 1944, I want to hear about it in the comments. What unit? What campaign? Where did they end up? Those stories live in family memory and nowhere else. Put them here.